So Ravens flock, Nnamdi Madubuike is a guy whose name flies under the radar during the offseason. When every year in the offseason, when we have these embarrassing collapses that cut our season short and this leaves us disappointed, we go into the offseason just talking about everything that we believe went wrong, everybody that we believe is at fault, everybody that we believe needs to step up. And again, in the midst of all of this, Madubuike is a guy who his name really never comes up. Like, I very rarely see anybody really discuss Madubuike like that. And I think that's unacceptable because, again, we're talking about a guy with the third or fourth highest salary on the team right now with $98 million on the line here. Like, you're talking about a guy making $24 million a year. And I wanted to dive in a bit on the past season that Madubuike just had, and was it good enough or not? So, as we all know, Nnamdi Madubuike, we drafted him out of Texas A&M back in 2020. He was a guy who his first couple of seasons, he was more of a rotational piece. He sat behind guys like Calais Campbell. But in 2023, when he got a chance to really be that guy, he stepped up. He put up a career high in sacks with 13. He also had 2 forced fumbles. And everything looked like it was on the up and up. Like, there was a lot to be excited about. I'm a big fan of Madubuike, obviously, and you're just thinking that it could only get better. He can only get better and be more impactful. And you're thinking, wow, man, we're one of these teams that now has an elite pass rusher on the interior part of the defensive line, which most teams really don't have. Like, most teams would be happy if their interior defensive linemen would get them 3 sacks in a year, let alone 13. Now, even though I was very excited about Madubuike because I'm a fan of him, there's always that fear in your head of like, man, I don't want to see somebody get paid on a contract year for balling out in a contract year when there's no guarantee that they'll be able to match that production going forward. I wish they would have maybe franchise tagged him, but they did not franchise tag him. They gave him a massive deal, $98 million. And it's been 1 year so far since that deal has happened. And in my opinion, I don't think he's lived up to the deal so far. I know it's still fairly early to say that, but I just simply don't think he's lived up to the contract so far. Doesn't mean he had a bad year. He had the 4th highest pressures amongst interior defensive linemen with 56 pressures. But overall, he wasn't the highest graded defensive tackle. He was like 36th, which isn't necessarily bad, but is not worth a $98 million contract. And his sack production, it literally got cut in half. It went from 13 to 6.5. Now, many people will crack jokes about Odafe Owe and him struggling to finish the job, like him being almost there but then coming up short. But low-key, that kind of was Madubuike's story this past year. And this is why you see he had such a high rate of pressures, but then his sacks didn't really match what he had just did or what he just put up, the numbers he just put up the year before. And again, for a guy making this type of money, especially a guy who trains with Aaron Donald and a guy who literally got the nickname Baby Aaron Donald from his teammates, you got to expect more out of him at this point. Like, this is a guy who, like, we can't forget, guys, Aaron Donald could put up double-digit sacks in his sleep. Aaron Donald was a menace to society. Even in Aaron Donald's final year, he had like 8 sacks. And again, that was the slightly worse version of him. Even then, he was still elite, but it's the slightly worse version of him, and he still put up 8 sacks. Right now, this is supposed to be Madubuike's prime. We got to expect more than 6.5 sacks. We're not talking about a guy who is just your average D tackle making average D tackle money, who you just want them to stop the run. Like, we're talking about a pass rushing defensive tackle. We're talking about a guy who we're expecting to be that double-digit sack guy. And when you look at this past season, there was a lot of games where Madubuike just simply wasn't a big factor. Like, he was a non-factor for most games. Outside of that one Cincinnati game where he had 3 sacks in one game, when you look at the other 16 games of the season, he only had 3.5 sacks in 16 games, which, to me, if I had to choose between Madubuike having one breakout game like he did against Cincinnati where he had 3 sacks, or choosing between what he did in 2023, I would rather have 2023 every day of the week. Like, there was no game in 2023 where he really was setting the world on fire stat-wise, but it was still a consistent every week, half a sack, 1 sack, 1 sack, 1 sack, half a sack. He literally tied the record for most consecutive games with at least half a sack. He tied the NFL record. He had about 11 or 12 of those games. And that's what I wanted to see this year. It was very disappointing to not see it. And like, when you think about some of the elite pass rushing defensive interior defensive linemen in the league, guys like Chris Jones is another guy that had like an underwhelming year this year, but Chris Jones is also a guy who on multiple occasions has put up 15 plus sacks. I want to see Madubuike show that, hey, that contract was not that 1 year was not fool's gold. And I definitely want to see that in the playoffs as well. One thing that Madubuike has over Chris Jones is Madubuike has shown up a bit in the playoffs, just not as much as I would like. So, for example, this past year in the playoffs, he had 2 sacks and 4 total tackles against the Steelers. And then he had half a sack and 7 tackles versus the Bills. But the Steelers game, I kind of take that with a grain of salt, because the Steelers, if we're being honest, they shouldn't have been in the playoffs in the first place. The Steelers are a team that's going nowhere fast. They're not a real threat. And while his numbers are still respectable in that specific game, that's like, the Steelers O-line isn't even that impressive in my opinion. Like, I'm not super hyped about him doing that in the wild card round. I wanted to see him do that against Buffalo. And if we're being honest, there were moments in the Buffalo game in the divisional round where Tavius Robinson seemed like a more impactful defensive lineman, especially when it came to stopping the run. There was at least 3 or 4 plays where Tavius Robinson just completely blew up the Bills' attempt at running the ball. And I wanted to see Madubuike have that type of production, because he's the $98 million man. We're not expecting much out of Tavius Robinson. He's Tavius Robinson. Maybe one day he'll be that guy, but right now he's just a guy. And also, to Madubuike's credit, Chris Jones, an elite defensive tackle. Chiefs fans have been on Chris Jones' head for up until about 2022. Chris Jones had never had a sack in the playoffs, and rightfully so. The Chiefs fans used to go hard at Chris Jones because of this, because they felt like, hey man, you're not stepping up when we need you most. And to be fair to Madubuike, he's already had a few sacks, but we need more than a few sacks at this point. We need game-changing plays, whether it's forced fumbles, whether it's picks, whether it's having moments like what Tavius Robinson had in the divisional round where he's stuffing the run on back-to-back plays. We need to see this out of the $98 million man. And I also want to see double-digit sacks in the regular season. I know sacks are a very tricky conversation when it comes to defensive tackles. However, we're not talking about a regular defensive tackle. We're talking about a guy who his own teammates nicknamed him Baby Aaron Donald. And if he's Baby Aaron Donald, then I need to see Aaron Donald production. And Aaron Donald in his prime could put up double-digit sacks in his sleep. Think about some of the games that could have turned out slightly differently if Madubuike had a similar year to what he had in 2023. But I've gone on long enough. Let me know what you guys think about Madubuike. Do you think he needs to step up? Do you think he will have a bounce back season in 2025?